He is the one.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome along to the wilds of Suffolk. I'm out here yet again doing what I do, walking along beautiful locations, and today is gorgeous, and giving you my thoughts and opinions on things that are happening in the world in the public consciousness. If it's your first time here, welcome. I hope you enjoy what I'm doing today. If you're a returning subscriber, 1,394, I think there are of you today, welcome. Welcome back, or welcome one and all. It's a pleasure and an honour to have you join me for these walks, so thank you one and all for being here. So, today, by the title, I'm entitling this video, What Does It Mean to Be British? Which is kind of funny, because, you know, I'm an Australian in Britain talking about what it means to be British. But it's an interesting subject, and I've been meaning to tackle this for quite some time. But you can transpose this discussion over to wherever you're from as well. What does it mean to be, well, obviously I'm Australian, so what does it mean to be Australian? What does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be wherever you're from? Today we're going to discuss that. We're going to be discussing a few different ways of looking at this, and how we should look at this this idea of who we are and where we come from, and what does that mean to us? Because we're being sold a lot of things in the name of being English or being British or being, you know, Scottish or being American or Australian or whatever. You're being asked to associate that that association with a lot of different things, and like I say, we're going to examine that today and see where it takes us. So welcome along for the ride. Who can tell where we're going to go to today? So, what does it mean to be British? Now, I've been living in this country for 25 years now. 25 years since 1999, and we'll be coming up to 25 years this year. And it's been an interesting ride so far. You know, I came here for a holiday and met my wife came in 1999, met my wife in 2000 and stayed ever since. And I have been welcomed into this country by one and all, really. There's, I think, some people that would like me to go back or go somewhere else, but here I shall remain because I've made my home here. Here we go, we got some other people out enjoying the beautiful forest today. Good morning, how are we doing? Lovely morning for a walk. Hello, puppy. Oh, as long as it does. Yeah, have a great day. So, how did this discussion idea, this idea of what does it mean to be British come about? Okay, so now I was recently back in Australia, for those of you keeping up with what I've been doing, and I noticed some things happening there that is to do with immigration, let's put it that way. Massive numbers of people coming from different countries into Australia, and making Australia much like where they came from. Okay? Now, no matter which way I go with this discussion today, and I mean, it doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't matter how I approach it, it's going to come across as me being xenophobic, racist, you know, just hatred of anybody from anywhere else, which is not the case. But the discussion as we go through it, I want you to understand why I'm doing this today, and hopefully by the end of it, you have a better idea of how I think and why I think that way. Hopefully, if I get this right, and why this discussion is necessary in the face of what's happening in our all of our countries at the moment, and why I think it's important to have this discussion. Okay, so when I was in Australia, you know, obviously I've been living here for a long time, and I haven't been back in Australia for about 8 years now. I'll go through this way if I can get through, trying not to cut myself up. You'll see I'm wearing a rain jacket today because just as I left the house to come here, which is, you know, only a 5-minute drive, it started pouring with rain. Standard England. And yeah, so I had to put my rain jacket on, but it is shorts and t-shirt weather here today. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's like 20 degrees for England. That's, you know, that's a height of summer for those of you who don't know. But absolutely gorgeous out here today. I hope it's as wonderful where you are. But okay, let's crack on with this. It's I've talked in circles enough and tried to prime the pump as much as I can to prepare myself. Like I say, when I come out here to do these talks, I have nothing pre-prepared. I have an idea, a concept in my mind of what I want to talk about, and then I have to try and piece those things together to make it a cohesive, coherent discussion that brings in multiple viewpoints rather than just my own. And how I come to my thinking, and this is the way that I come out here and do this, is I try and give you the way that I think and how I came to that thinking. Okay? All right. So I was back in Australia, and a lot of people from different countries, you know, India, you know, all over the world, in Australia. And the thing I noticed was in the area where my house was predominantly white Australians. When I bought the place there 32 years ago, I would say probably about 97-98% white. In the because it was a brand new estate, and it was blocks of land, and you know, everyone was building new. Now I would say it's probably about 80% people from other countries. Yeah, which I have no problem with. Well, there's a few issues I have, but we'll get to those in time. Okay. And one of the biggest things I noticed was there was in the local area there was 4 new mosques that were built. 4. Now, for those of you who are going to kick off right now and say, "Oh, you're an Islamophobe, you're complaining about mosques being built," no, no, it's a fucking no, it's a fucking goat. That's not it. That's not what this is about today. For those of you who don't know, I've worked with the Islam channel. I had my own show on the Islam channel. You know, I have no ill feeling towards Islam or Muslims at all. But it's part of the discussion and we need to have it. Okay? So I'm not an Islamophobe. I'm not a xenophobe or any other words. But this is part of the discussion. And there's no way we can approach this without having titles thrown at me, and that's fine. Whatever, I don't care. Here in this country, we have the same immigration issues going on. Unchecked immigration, well, it's being checked by someone apparently. The government's in control. Of course, we should trust the government. Same in America. People from all over the world flooding into these countries that are apparently the most racist places in the world, and they want to come to the most racist places in the world. Makes sense to me. And people are upset about it, okay? Now, should they be? This is the question. Should they be upset, or should we be at least be able to have a discussion where we question, should we allow so many people from foreign nations coming into this nation, or whatever nation you're in, and not integrating into society as it stands, society as it stands? Now, let's rewind a couple of 100 years. Okay. This nation that I live in is called Great Britain. Okay. Now, what made Great Britain great? What made England, England? What made Scotland, Scotland? What does it mean to be British? And how do we come to those meanings, and how do we come to that idea of what it means to be British or Scottish or Australian or American or wherever you're from, transpose or transmute or whatever, over to where you're from? Because I'm sure where you are, you're probably having the same discussion, okay? Well, you should be, if you're not. Well, I'm guaranteed there's people that are already. Now, what made Britain great? Okay, so If we go back hundreds of years or thousands of years, we have the British Empire, colonialism, going around the world and sometimes conquering other cultures in their country, other times integrating within the cultures of those countries for a reason. Okay, usually the reasons were for things like spices or minerals or metals or whatever it was that Britain, Italy, the Dutch, Americans, people from Western nations went to places like India, Africa, nations within Africa for resources, for building their culture. Now, Britain, colonialism was all over the world. I mean, Britain had a massive empire, the Romans had a massive empire, the Americans now currently have a massive empire, and these empires are built, and as they spread out across the globe, the biggest issue that faces those empires is being able to constantly stock the outposts of the empire. Okay, so for instance, America has bases all over the world, South Korea, Germany, Ukraine, Poland, here in the UK, all over the world, America does. Now, if for whatever reason the supply chains to supply their troops or their warships or their war machine is interrupted, then that, in the case of America, that imperialism breaks down. Now, there's an argument to say, well, the thing that made Britain Great Britain, there's arguments to say, well, Britain had naval superiority and had the better cannons, which is why they dominated the water. Rule Britannia rules the waves, And the British had better ships, better cannons, so they were able to impose their will on other countries that didn't have that technology. Okay, so what we find through history is that the person with the bigger gun usually rules the world. Bigger army, a bigger, more military spending. So we had the British going into India, we had the British going into parts of Africa, the Americans are in Africa, the French are in Africa, different nations in Africa, obviously, for those of you watching. The French, the British, the Americans, you have the Dutch, over in South Africa, and all through the continent of Africa, all the different nations of Africa. The French are in the Ivory Coast, and it's usually done through the use of weaponry. So the use of or the threat of weaponry. So whoever has the bigger gun gets to make the rules, right? So when we're talking about, if we go back far enough in history, it's always been the same. So people were like, oh yeah, but you white people came over to Africa and took over our nations. But, African nations, tribes within those nations were warring with each other for political and power over a particular area. Same in America, the Red Indians in America were warring with each other before white people arrived for control of the land. So control of lands and people and the ability to grow food and what have you has always been at the end of a barrel of a gun or bows and arrows or a knife or whatever. So it's always been the person with the bigger gun gets to make the rules. Okay? So we're going to set that out right from the beginning. So the British and their colonialism spread across the world, the Americans and their imperialism spreading across the world, democracy at the barrel of a gun. Okay? Think how we think and we won't kill you. Right? But we want to point fingers, if you listen to the media, of course, that the people who are doing all the terrorism are Islamic. Okay, he comes from that country, must be a terrorist. And the very people that they put on the screens all the time, the lunatics, the fringe minority of those particular religions, they call themselves in that religion, people who call themselves Muslims sometimes, will go out and say the craziest shit to make the religion look bad. And there are tenets within that religion that are bad, but there are tenets within Judaism that are terrible. Same with Christianity. There's always the fringe minority that are fucking terrible people and will do anything to destroy anyone who doesn't have the same thinking as they do. Okay? Does it remind you of anything? You know, divide and conquer. So we see that over the years, Britain, America, all these countries have taken land from other people by the use of force for their own means. Maybe it's for the minerals of the country, or, you know, what have you. It's been done for millennia. Okay? Now we have a situation where China, the BRICS nations, are investing in foreign nations, you know, through China's doing it through the Belt and Road Initiative, where they're trying to set up trade routes through Europe and through Africa and, you know, different nations in the Middle East for trading routes rather than using the Western system, which is, like I say, at the barrel of a gun. China's not threatening anybody to implement new freeways or railways or whatever. What they're doing is they're making a trade agreement where they say, we will build infrastructure for you at our cost, but you have to give up some of your mineral wealth for us for that service that we've provided for you. Fair, I think. Do I trust the Chinese Communist Party? Of course not. Of course not. Do I trust the Americans or the British? Of course not. But we're not talking about the people of those countries. What we're talking about is the politicians of those countries, because the people in China are wonderful people. The people in Germany are wonderful people. The people in Russia are wonderful people. The people in Ukraine, well, most of them, except the Nazis, of course, are wonderful. You know, the people in countries are not representative by the people who are not represented by the people who are running the country. 9 times out of 10, you know. Are the people represented in Brazil by Lula, the convicted felon, that criminal, the guy that was in prison for embezzlement and everything else that he did? Are they accurately represented by that guy? Are we in this country, in Britain, the UK, are we accurately represented by Rishi Sunak, the guy who was never voted in? Of course we're not. So we see across the world that our political masters are criminals and scumbags who are involved in taking as much as they can from the public purse, putting it in their own pockets and their friends' pockets, while bending over the public of those nations and giving them a good seeing to make sure they're reminded that they are chattel slaves to their system. So just remember that. Okay. So what made Britain great? Great Britain. And where's that cultural tie to the people? What way do we, as the people of the nation, how do we associate ourselves with being British or Australian or American? Put in your word. What's the association that we have that makes us, you know, proud to be British or American or Australian or whatever? What's our association with that? What does it mean to be British? Now, culture is what the association is. So the culture of a country, you know, so we can say, all right, America was founded on Christian principles, okay? Now, the people in question came from Britain to go and found America, obviously. British nations, okay, so Welsh, British, English, and Scottish, and obviously some Irish as well over in the US. And the foundings of America were these people that they called the Pilgrims, much like the founding in Australia was what they called them was 10-pound poms. So people would pay £10 and they'd get on a ship and sail for months and they would go to Australia. My grandparents did that. My mother's parents did exactly that. They travelled on a boat over from Scotland to Australia to start a new life in that country, you know, somewhere different, somewhere sunny. British people leaving this country to go somewhere sunny? No, that's unpatriotic, surely. But you know, we had people from Britain go over to America to found America. And we had Britain from the people from the UK go and start out in Australia, So we've always had immigration from one nation to another, always have. And what I found when I came to this country, obviously I'm white, I'm a male, and we're the problem, around the world, of course, white males. But because I'm white and I speak the language, it's the integration for me coming to this country is a lot easier because I don't stand out that much, because I am much the same as the people who are in this country, right? So what stands out is when you have people from different nations that look different, dress differently, have different cultural norms, will stand out more, okay? So me coming here was a much easier integration than, say, someone coming from the Middle East or from a nation in Africa, let's say. And I was welcomed with open arms because, like, as I say, every nation... Oh, I need to take a step backwards for this one. All right, let me take a step back so we can move forward. Okay, in order for us to move forward, we have to understand something very clearly at the beginning of this talk. Well, we're not at the beginning anymore. We're probably halfway through, more than halfway through. We have to understand that nations, in order for nations to continue to flourish and grow, you need to have a populace that's going to pay into that nation for the nation to keep on moving forward. Now, a nation needs to be constantly growing, okay? Now, in Western nations, people are having less children, okay? We're having less children because A, it's expensive, B, because, well, the world's going to end tomorrow because of climate change, C, because, it just wouldn't be right to bring a child into this world where it's going to contribute to more carbon dioxide, crazy people. Or, the population's also going down because, and people are not going to find this popular for me to say this, but this agenda of pushing transgenderism and everyone's gay on everybody means that you're going to reduce the population because people aren't going to have babies if they're gay, or if they've cut their penis off, or they've removed their womb because they're not a woman. Okay? And it is an agenda. I mean, you can call me crazy, you can call me whatever you like, I don't care. I've had all the labels, doesn't bother me. But if you're going to push these agendas, and it's only in Western nations, have you noticed that? And in no African nation are they holding up and going, pride, everybody, we should be bowing down to all the gay people for a month. Honestly, you never find that in Africa or the Middle East or anywhere in Asia for that matter. But here in the West, that's what we're doing. It's an agenda to reduce the population, which is kind of weird because at the same time the politicians say, well, we need to. This is where it gets really makes me angry. Okay, the politicians, in the same breath as saying there's too many people in the world, are also complaining about the declining population in Western nations. That means that the fiscal policies of those nations have to change because the tax chattel are not contributing as much tax because, well, there's less people and they're having less babies and people are retiring and the pension funds don't have enough money to pay them. So we need more money coming in, which means we need to import more people to work to pay more tax because Western nations are not having enough children. Remember that. But who is having enough children? Middle East, Africa. They have large families because that's always been the way things are done in those areas of the world. Large families, sometimes 10 children. Now, if you could go to a nation where you're going to get paid for every child that you have, do you see a problem being formed here? Now, the idea of this discussion is not to pick on nations or pick on people from different nations to say, well, look what they're doing, this is what this is about. But it is this idea of this national identity that's been broken down by a massive import of people from different nations and different cultures that are diluting the British culture. Now, I'm going to have people say, but what's British culture, Chris? What's American culture? What's Australian culture? What does that even mean? What does it mean to be British? Because if you can't define it, then it has no meaning. So people have no link to where they're from, and you have no history. Now, we've spoken about history before, where how are rulers in charge, kings and queens, and how do they maintain their rule of, well, this is why we're fit to rule, because they own history. So the kings and queens and the royal families of the world and the rich and powerful, they maintain their history. So they have a very strong link to their history. They can link their history back for millennia, back to, as our king here said, King Charles, the pedo apologist, and I'm not going to call him a pedo, but he hangs out with pedos, so I don't have any pedo friends, and if they did, they'd be in a hole in the ground. But he has pedo friends, and he's perfectly fine with it. So take that for whatever you want, but I'm putting on the table there. Best friends with Jimmy Savile, worst paedophile in history. His brother, best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. Just saying. I need to say it every video because this is who is telling us how to think and how to live, okay? We have to make drastic changes to our way we live here in this country in Great Britain so that we can pass a fuck off. Pedo. Oh, pedo apologist. That's allegedly. Don't know whether that's going to save me, but anyway, I'll say it anyway. So these people, if we're going to call them people, I don't think they are, but let's just say that they are. These people have a link to their history, and if you erode people's link to the land where they're from, their culture, their history, then what do they have? Who are they? They're people. They're floating people. All they are is useful idiots to be tax chattel for the people who own the world, corporations, monarchies, and self-appointed governments. Because, as we know, election is just spelt with a silent S at the front. So when we ask that question, what does it mean to be British? I mean, the British culture is based on what? I think it can be summed up in a few different words. That keep calm and carry on. That's the British way. To be British is just to move forward no matter what comes at you. The London got bombed to hell in the Second World War. Strangely, Houses of Parliament never got hit. Or the Buckingham Palace, which is in London as well. Or any of the other palaces, the royal palaces. None of those got hit by any Nazi bombs. Amazing. Because if I was a military leader and I wanted to demoralize the people of a particular country, I would destroy those cultural iconic landmarks that people look to for being a part of their heritage and a part of their culture, and that is held up as that's who we are. The Houses of Parliament built all these years ago. Now, if we go back further in history, in this country we have something called the Magna Carta, with the British Constitution, Bill of Rights. America has much the same. They have taken what the British ruling monarchy had here and made it for their country when they had their Independence Day, July 4th, 1776, I think it was. Don't quote me. When they overthrew the British rule. Now, why would the Americans overthrow the British rule and create their own nation? Because they were being taxed into oblivion by the then king. Now, in the Magna Carta, Magna Carta was written and ratified to say that royalty are to be treated as every other person. So they're not above the law and they're equal to man, right? Bill of Rights is everyone has a right to live and blah, blah, blah. If you don't know, please go and look. And these rights are not given to us. This is what these documents ratify. We're saying the Bill of Rights, our rights as people, to be able to speak our words, to be able to have thoughts of our own, to be able to live our lives the way that we want to, is not given to us by government. They were not granted to us by government. Government doesn't grant us our rights. They have the ability to take them away, illegally, of course, But the rights are not given to us. We are born with those rights. We are born with those rights, and those rights are granted to us by our Creator. Now that doesn't sit well with some people either, but don't care. We're living in a created reality. This is all created for us. None of it's real. We're living in a simulation, and that's going to upset a few people as well. But this is all simulated. We're living in a giant test tube, in a giant game, where we are told how to think a certain way, to be a certain way, in order to have association with a country or a place, or what it means to be where you're from. To have that patriotism. Now, this discussion is all over the place, and I understand it's sort of hard to comprehend exactly how I'm trying to put this together, but I'll try and condense it down so you've listened to the arguments of the for and against and all this kind of thing. Nations, in order to grow, need more people to keep the economy moving forward. When you have an aging population like we have all over the world, the boomers, which is the people born between 1946 and 1964, there's 1 billion people born in that period. The boomers are now coming to retirement age, and a lot of them are leaving this plane of existence. So in order to fill the void of those boomers that are retiring or dying or passing on, we need replacement. As people in the West are not having children, we need to replace those people with other people. So we have a massive influx from other nations. Now, this is all driven, it's all deliberate. It's called the Great Replacement Theory, and it's all deliberate, and it's all done by corporations who require cheap labour to keep their corporations running. We discussed this cheap labour whole thing before when we talked about inflation. We're talking about you can only raise prices so much before people won't pay it, and your business will suffer. So how do you find ways of reducing your bottom line? The easiest one is how much money you're paying out to employees. Now, if you have an employee that is born in this country, that has certain understanding of the laws and the way things work, we'll push back if you say, oh, we're actually going to reduce your salary now because it's harder for this company to make money. Those people would leave and go somewhere else. Whereas if you have people come from a third world nation who haven't got two sticks to rub together, and you're giving them an opportunity for 50% less than you pay for a person born in this country, it makes financial sense. Okay? So what we're doing is by what is also being done simultaneously to bringing people in is saying to people that anyone who says anything against what's going on, or against people from other nations coming into the nation unchecked, unfettered, and being paid, or being their hotels being paid for, or whatever, to come to this nation, if you say anything against it, you're a xenophobe, you're a racist, you get labelled with a label, so that people won't stand up and say anything when their culture of their nation is being eroded by people who are coming here and refuse to integrate into that culture, bringing their culture with them and not integrating into the culture of the nation that they're going to. Now, as I say, I come from a nation very similar. It was founded by England, really. I come from a nation that was with the similar principles and similar foundational principles of how we feel a nation works and operates, and it was easier for me to integrate into this culture because I come from a culture that was already founded by the same people. Okay? Now, if you're coming from somewhere else where you don't have the same foundational principles of how a culture should work, and then we should go to why would people leave their nation in the first place and come to a nation where the perceived idea, or what we're being told all the time, is that we're racist and xenophobic. Now, a lot of my wife, I don't know whether I've said before, my wife is a carer. She's in aged care. So she goes to elderly people's homes and cares for them in their home. People who are, some of them are bedbound, other people she takes them out for coffee because they need company. And my wife is also a foreigner. okay? She's a foreigner, but because she's also white, she comes from Europe. You know, English is her second language, but she speaks English better than most English people, I have to say. Her integration in this country was easier than someone coming from an African nation as well, because she doesn't stand out because she's also white, okay? But that said, she comes from a similar foundation, a principle of how the country was set up, what the rules are within that country and how things work. Whereas if you're coming from somewhere in the Middle East with completely different cultural norms, how are you going to fit in the country we're moving to? And why would you want to leave that country in the first place? Okay? So the thing that strikes me as a bit strange is you have people from failing nations, completely failed nations. You know, a lot of South American nations are moving up to, the South and Central American nations are going up and going into North America, into the USA for a better life. But yet they want to maintain their culture of the shitbox they came from, the shithole. And yes, it's a shithole. It's not the people that have made it a shithole, it's the government, and the people have gone along with their government. You with me? So these people from these shithole nations, they have this cultural association with their nation, still stand up and wave the flag of their nation and go, oh yes, we come from this wonderful nation of Colombia or wherever it is, you know, whatever shithole nation it is. And that's falling into poverty, that's falling into, you know, crime, and, you know, like Colombia, Medellin in Colombia was the kidnap capital of the world at one point. Okay, so if you want to argue with me and say, no, Colombia's wonderful, I'm sure it is. But when you have the moniker of being the kidnap capital of the world or the murder capital of the world, it's probably a shithole that you live in. Okay, I think we can all agree with that. Okay, London is rapidly falling into that. Right. Now, there's so many angles that we come at this from. All right, so in association with people moving in between nations, which should be actively encouraged, the people moving into nations should have to, like my wife had to become a British citizen to come here and go through a questionnaire and, you know, understand the culture of the country that she was coming to, so she could integrate into it, okay? And she was happy to do that because she's living here. Whereas if you have people from different nations don't speak the language, don't want to speak the language, who want to keep their culture, which is important to them, and I understand that. But if you're moving to a different nation, then why do you want to keep the culture of the nation that you came from? You want to destroy the place that you're going to, the same as you did the other place, by keeping that same cultural norms that have destroyed the other place? Doesn't make any sense to me. Okay? But, you know, every country needs immigration. Right? That's not to say we should stop immigration, because I don't think we should. But we should be more selective about who is immigrating. Now, when we go back to the story of why are people leaving their nations if they're such wonderful places? Now, this is where it gets a little bit difficult for Western nations to be so proud and hold their heads up high, because we, not the people, but the politicians who are in the country, and if we're supporting those politicians, then we are going along with it, okay? We, as British people, and I count myself as British, I have a British passport, I have sworn allegiance, I am now British, I'm a dual citizen, I am a citizen of two nations. But I have less association with Australia now than I did, although I still call myself an Australian because I was born there, okay? Western nations, the people in those nations, we have allowed our governments and institutions, government institutions, to go to other nations to rob them of their mineral wealth. You know, Africa, okay, for all the people out there that believe in climate change, it's all bullshit, but let's just say it's real, okay? Let's just, for want of a better word, let's just say it's real. It's not. Shh, don't tell anyone, okay? We are pushing this idea that we need to go electric and it needs to be get off oil, and, you know, all these idiots that are painting Stonehenge with paint. If I see a person from Just Stop Oil doing something stupid, let's just say that it won't end well. it won't end well for them, especially if they want to get violent with me. I almost pray for it. I don't want to be violent with people, but you know, once in London, I was at the tube station, and some idiots climbed on top of a tube train to try and stop everyone in peak hour. Needless to say, they were beaten, and they should have been. You know. Now, the Western nations have gone over to these nations and are robbing them of their mineral wealth for not paying for fractions of what it should be worth. Okay, we've talked about what's something worth, what gives something value. For instance, what's the biggest export out of Mexico? Silver. Uganda just had a massive, the largest gold find in the world. Uganda. And they were putting out a press release to say we have this massive find of gold in the nation. We're worried that we're going to get invaded by surrounding nations. Okay, so it's not just Western nations that are doing this, every nation is doing it, okay? But Western nations have gone into countries in Africa and taken their mineral wealth for themselves to make our society better, cheaply, whilst leaving most of those people in the developing or third world nations in abject poverty, because it's all corrupt. The governments of those countries get paid, but the people who are born in that nation, who have the mineral wealth sitting under their feet, don't benefit from it whatsoever. Now, the French found out the hard way, because the French have integrated nuclear into their electricity generation much more than everywhere else in the world. French are leading the way on nuclear reactors, and the French have been relying on cheap uranium coming out of Africa for a long time. Now the African nations are like, no, can't have it, sorry, we're kicking you out. And they threw them out of their nation. So now what are the French going to do? Oh, but nuclear is so cheap, Chris, you don't understand. It's so cheap, and it produces lots of electricity. It's only cheap because the governments of nations where uranium is mined subsidise the mining of that uranium. So the taxpayer subsidises the mining of the uranium, then they sell it cheaply because, well, the taxpayer's paying for it anyway. They sell it cheaply so that we can have cheap electricity that's paid for by the taxpayer. And then when you want to buy the electricity, you have to pay for it again. You know, you're paying twice. Not 3 times or 4 times. Oh, but if we went electric, it would be all sorted out, Chris. Okay, where does the cobalt come from? Oh, that's right, Africa. You know, what else have we got? The silica for the chips. You know, there's only certain places in the world produce that. You know, the mineral wealth of the world is what's being fought over right now, which is why there's a proxy war with Russia and Ukraine. Mineral land wealth. There's always a power struggle over controlling the things that come out of the ground or the ground itself, because you can grow crops in it or whatever. And the people within those countries that can produce the crops or can go and mine the things within the countries. We are tax chattel. We are useful idiots that are there to go and mine, to go and cook and do all the mindless jobs, while the people in power sit on their ass and pretend to fight with each other. Next thing, they're clinking glasses together at the G7. Oh, but Russia's not invited to the G7 this year. Yeah, so Russia is the problem. All the Western nations that have done exactly the same as what Russia's done, we're okay, because we're spreading democracy at the barrel of a gun. So the concept of this talk is, what does it mean to be British? What does it mean to be Australian? What does it mean to be, American, wherever you're from? We have this foundational belief in who we think we are based on the history that we're taught about our nation and what our nation stands for, right? But all that patriotism and that the idea of who we are and that's why we should stand for our nation and be proud of our nation is used by these people in power to get us to go and fight their wars, to get us to go and invade other countries for their mineral wealth, to spread democracy. We are useful idiots, because those things that are held up for us to be proud of, to be patriotic, to say this is what it means to be British, is a useful tool to get us to act the way they want us to act. But then, if you then use that, okay, well, it means British, we are predominantly a white nation, we are predominantly a Christian or a Catholic nation, we are predominantly this. If you say that, then you're a racist and a xenophobe. So the very things that are used to elicit that patriotism, to get us to respond to the way that the people in power want us to respond, is also used against us by saying, well, this nation was founded, as a white nation, blah, 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 Christian values, blah, blah, blah. If you say that, then the equal thing that they're using you to go and use against other people is also being used against you to say, well, you can't say that because it's racist. You understand? So you can see that the very thing that you're being told is, we should be proud to be British, and it's a multicultural society, and if you say anything against it, then you're racist or xenophobic or whatever other term that's used. So then you know it's a weapon. So what's the point, I hear you say? What's the point then, Chris? What's the point of what you're trying to get at here? In the 60s, I think it was, 50s or 60s, I don't know the exact date, I'm sorry. There were ships that came over from Jamaica that brought black people here to live in this country. The Windrush, I think it was called, the ship. Don't quote me, I think so. Those people were black, and they found it hard to integrate into the society because white British people didn't trust black people because they'd never encountered them before. But the thing is that people from Jamaica and from these different nations have integrated into society, and also from India, from Pakistan, from all over the world, have integrated into British society, bettered the society in many places, in many cases, by bringing part of their culture here to integrate with the British culture. So now you have, like the Indian culture, for instance, we have a dish called chicken tikka masala, which is actually, it's an Indian dish that was created here in the UK. So there's that British influence over Indian culture. So that mixture of cultures can actually be a good thing. So ultimately what I'm trying to say is that there should be an amount of immigration that's especially for a nation of 60 million people, which is how many we've got here, in order for the society and for the financial betterment of the country. We need people to come to this country. Every country needs immigration, but you also need to hold on to your culture. Go to China, very strong cultural background, because they own their history, and their history is dominated by understanding that there was many wars fought in China. Qing dynasty, don't quote me, where there was all different rulers all over China, where there was one ruler that was ruling from Beijing that went out and conquered all the other rulers to have a unified China under one banner. Okay? Now, that unification has made China stronger because the people are all working they have their history, which is culturally appropriate for them. But you, as a foreigner, can you own land in China? Can you? As a foreigner, can you own land in India? What we've seen in Africa, some of the African nations, Zimbabwe was a prime example, where they kicked out all the white farmers and said, you're responsible for everything that's gone bad in this country. And when all the white farmers left, what happened? Zimbabwe fell down a hole. Same thing's happening in South Africa. It's white people are to blame for everything. Now, much like the Romans, when they had the Roman Empire that was across the world, the Romans brought many, many, many amazing things to many places around the world, and their integration into a lot of places around the world was a positive in many aspects, but also destroyed some of the history of those nations. Places like Hungary has been invaded by the Turkish. The Ottoman Empire was ruling Hungary for a long time. The Nazis were there, so there's that Nazi. Then you had the Russians, this. And when you go to Hungary, you see all the influences of those powerful empires had on that nation. And there's a lot of, there's culinary influences, there's building influences, how the buildings are built. The Russians, very, very utilitarian. The buildings are there for a purpose. Turkish, a lot of Turkish bars and the food, we have all these these cultural injections into society through people coming there and bringing part of their culture with them, but still integrating into the society. So the argument is always going to be, what's the best level of how many people should be allowed into the nation, and what should they understand about the nation they're moving to, and how should they integrate best while still holding on to the culture of where they come from into the nation where they're moving to. This is the question I'm asking. I mean, if you're going to go to live in a foreign nation, surely you should have to have an understanding of their culture, their history, and how they think and how they are, to be able to integrate into that society, maybe speak the language. If I go to a different country for a holiday or whatever, I try and learn some of the language while I'm there to interact with people, because I'm visiting their country. Just visiting. If I'm going to live somewhere, I lived in France for 2 years, but when I went there, I didn't speak a word of French, not one word. When I left, I could understand and speak conversational French. Not very well. I mean, my accent's terrible, but but you know what I mean? I think we should all have an idea in our heads of where we feel comfortable drawing that line in the sand of who should be welcomed into the country. I mean, we should welcome people into the country. But if we're going to be starting wars and robbing mineral wealth from different countries, or starting wars in other nations, or toppling leaders or dictators or what we're calling dictators in other nations, and causing people to want to leave because the Western nations have started troubling those nations, then we have to question that as well, and why we're in other nations, and why we aren't just developing ourselves and working in partnership with other nations to better them and lift them up. Well, we can't do that, Chris, because then they get ahead of us. What are we really trying to achieve in this world? Is it for powerful individuals to get more powerful and control more people? Is it for the betterment of our society? Is it for the betterment of people? Or is it for another agenda? Because if it truly is to make the world a better place for everybody that's in it, then we wouldn't be allowing, let's put it that way, we wouldn't be allowing these people who are supposed to be in power to make rules that are detrimental to not only the people who are living in the nation where people are coming to, but also for the people who are coming to the nation because we've destroyed their nation in the first place. So, given all that, what do we do? What do we do? As the average person, I'm just a guy, like I've said before, I'm nothing special, I'm just a person just like you, who comes out into the forest and talks about these kind of subjects because I'm told I'm not allowed to. Because people get upset, people get triggered, by having a discussion, by words, because words kill people, apparently. Okay. But you hurt me. So what do we do? I mean, what voice do we have, really? What voice do we have? Well, we have a voice to say no. If you're bold enough to be able to say no to government control, which is not easy. The jabs were the first test of how much guts do you have to stand in opposition to a war machine that thinks nothing of you. I mean, you've got a multi-trillion-dollar media empire that is stacked against you, that will turn people against you, your family and your friends, that they've known you for your entire life, know who you are, but then they listen to this media machine that will turn on you like that if they're told to. How do you fight against that? How do you push back? How do you get your ideas heard? How do you stand and stand your ground and say, line in the sand, won't cross it? Sorry. We have in this country an election coming up. Now, as I've said before, election is just with a silent, it's a selection with a silent S. But if we don't take part, then we have no say, right? We have an election coming up in this country where we have the ruling party, which is the Conservatives, useless. Labor, which is useless. Liberal Dems, useless. The Greens, but the Greens will give their vote to the Conservatives anyway, so they're as good as useless. We have this new party here called Reform, which is a guy called Nigel Farage, who is the one that got us out of the EU mess with a term called Brexit. So we left the EU. That was under Nigel Farage. He's just started a new political campaign here in this nation called Reform. One of the tenets of their reform policy is to cut immigration until we can find out and work out how best to tackle what we need in this country and who we should invite and how we can better work with people that are coming to this country for a better life. Because ultimately, if we're building up this nation, then we need people to build it up. And what are we building it up for? For people to come here and benefit from it and contribute to it. Right? So we shouldn't be scared of immigration. We shouldn't be scared of other people coming from this other countries. What we should be scared of is losing our culture and our belief systems because a politician or an NGO or a world governing body tells us we have to. Okay? Yeah? Now, I'm not telling you who to vote for, because who am I? I'm just a guy. I'm not telling you how to think. I'm not telling you what to think. I'm asking questions and talking about things because I think we need to have a talk about subjects like this. And we all should have a voice in what does it mean to be British? What does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be Australian? You know, what does it mean to you? I mean, please let me know in the comment section. I mean, because at the end of the day, if we don't have an association with who we are, where we're from, then what have we got? Who are we as people? That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. And that culture, it should come from the people rather than being driven by people that are trying to socially engineer our society to make us think and act and do and be the way they want us to be, rather than how we should think and act and question to be who we are. Right? Interesting talk. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. So that all said, thank you one and all for joining me. It was a bit all over the place today, but it's like, this is the way my brain works. It's all over the place. And it is trying to coalesce these thoughts into a cohesive argument or a cohesive discussion to say everything's not as simple as what it's made out to be. Oh, we should just stop immigration. No, we shouldn't. That's ridiculous, you know. But I hope you enjoyed what I did. Come back and join me again if you did. If you didn't, well, I don't care. I'm not here to profit from you. I'm not here to gain anything. I'm not here to lose anything. I'm just here to talk my mind and ask some questions. And I hope that people join me for this walk and for these rides and contribute to the discussion with their thoughts as well. So please do that. I want to hear what you think. And yes, support the movement of discussions and clear thinking, because if we don't use our thoughts, we're going to have other people thinking for us. We don't need that, do we? So thank you one and all for joining me here today. As I always say at the end of these talks, go out into the world, do good and be good. And you can change the world with the way that you do things, the way that you think, the way that you act, the way that you talk, what you're sharing. So do that and you can make the world a better place. But most of all, look after yourself, look after each other. And I look forward to catching up real soon. Ciao for now.